Symposium. And of course, you are going to tell us about yourself. Then you'll give me maybe a minute to just talk about what's coming up and how to find information. So Amanda, thank you. Please, about Amanda.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to take my hat off to you for your extraordinary commitment to engaging, well, the world in this wonderful profession, which is called mediation. And it's not an easy one, actually. So it's definitely not a take the training, add it to the CV kind of profession. This thing that we do, it's really rather special in that it takes quite a lot of effort to develop not just the skills, but actually the being a mediator. And you don't do mediation. It's about being a mediator. And I was so interested in this topic of mediation of language because it's one of the things that it's almost impossible to teach. And if anybody does try to teach it, unless it's integrated and completely integrated with the person, it will almost always sound condescending, judgmental, which is not supposed to be on the table at all. And if it isn't part of you, and a really comfortable part of you, then you're always going to be sort of slightly off kilter in your conversations with the parties. So I think my first thought when I looked at the topic, my first thought was, well, actually mediation is a language in itself, of itself. So, and that language is made up, like all languages, from the culture, from the context, from experience, from values, beliefs, assumptions. It is a culture, and that culture then overlays itself on your mediation practice. And the joy of being a mediator is that you bring yourself to the practice, and the more integrated you are, the more work you've done on walking the talk, the better you can be of service to people. So I don't say that lightly, but I am in service to the people who hire me as a mediator, and I take that very seriously. So maybe on a slightly lighter note, I could tell you a little bit about why I'm so in love with language, as a thing. It's been an integral part of my life and my education. And that started probably with, my parents were both extraordinarily intelligent and very capable, but their education was interrupted by the war. So neither of them went to university, even though both were eminently capable, and happily, my father later on won a scholarship to Harvard. So he had that sort of kind of opportunity again. And they were both very open to experience, to use a psychological term. They were very open to experience, and they had both come out of really quite close-knit communities and got on a plane and gone off to Africa to find a new life and do something. And so Swahili was the first thing that they got their head round. And certainly my father had to be absolutely fluent in Swahili. He was chief prosecutor in the Kenya police. And he was also what you would call today a game warden. So he was both, and this was during the time of the Mau Mau. And so his expeditions, and actually he became very unpopular with the British government because he wouldn't do what they told him to. He went out and negotiated amnesties rather than arresting them and bringing them back and trying them. So that wasn't what they wanted in those days, many years ago. And so I was very, very pleased that I was born in Africa. I still am, actually. and so, you know, in my house, the sort of language was kind of mixed up, and, you know, it was our language and it became the language of our family. And then, so that was kind of the first memory of being conscious of language, other languages, and what they meant and how they were used, and the song of the language, the sound, and that sort of wonderful music. It is music, language is music. So fast forward a little bit, and quite a bit actually. I learned to read at a very, very young age. I was besotted with books. I had my notes in a book nearly all the time. And when I went to boarding school, which was another story, when the lights went out, I snuck a torch in and I was reading a dictionary. I was reading a dictionary, right? And I read this dictionary at night, not novels or romance or anything like. No, Amanda was reading a dictionary. And I thought this was fantastic, the fact that something could mean so many things. And then I also had a fantastic English teacher at the same school. And at the end of every lesson, he would give us a huge long list of words that we had to learn and learn how to use. And so this was a theme throughout my entire life. And it's the passion for language and using it and understanding how to use it. I've been blessed that I had, you know, a really early start. Then I went on and I went to university. I did French, German, and Italian. And I have actually had the opportunity to mediate in both French and Italian. I couldn't do it today. I'd need a holiday in both countries to get back up to speed, because, you know, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so that's a very important part when you learn some other language and you learn it to a standard where you can translate simultaneously. You really do get an appreciation of what it means to be able to communicate. I was driven by a very simple thing, very simple. I wanted to be able to communicate with people. I wanted to talk with them, find out about their lives, what they were doing, where they were, and you know, that was a huge motivation. Sitting with people and having a conversation about what matters to them has mattered to me for forever. And so that sits nicely with, you know, being a mediator. And there's a sort of sense, that when I discovered that language was more than just the words and the sound of it, the time I discovered that was quite visceral, actually. I had a corporate career before I became a mediator, and I was a marketing director for a tannery. And I developed this sort of range for Japan. And when I'd spoken to a consultant about how to get into Japan, they said, oh, well, it's going to take you 5 years. And I said, well, we'll be bust in 6 months, so thank you very much. I'll work it out. and off they went, and off I went but getting it, and I've always loved Japanese culture, and I actually practice an art form called kintsugi, which is mending broken pots. And maybe I get an opportunity to talk about that a bit more because it's very relevant to mediation. So I went on this trip with this sort of brand new technologically improved product. I arrived at the airport, long trip, and the agent had organised for me to go straight to a meeting. And, thank you very much. I was absolutely washed out, but never mind. I went to this meeting. And that evening, we went out for dinner in a classic Japanese restaurant. And there I was sitting, looking forward to this very much. And I said to my agent, who was doing the translation for me, Siguro, don't worry about me. I'll look at the wallpaper and, whatever. You just relax and, just talk. But I was watching very carefully. I was fascinated. It wasn't staring. And then all of a sudden, my finger came up. I didn't point because that's not right, but my finger went up and I said, now just you be careful. And I felt mortified. I was absolutely mortified. It just came out of my mouth, now just you be careful. Well, the whole place just blew up. My agent was in trouble because he told them I didn't speak Japanese. I don't speak Japanese and didn't at that time either, but I'd been watching so carefully that I could see the other language, the language of expression. And it had bypassed my brain and gone straight to my emotions. And I knew this chap was speaking unfavorably. Mind you, in those days, they weren't terribly fond of anybody from outside Japan. And certainly a young female British director appearing on a doorstep was not. And I redeemed myself by singing the entire Beatles catalogue at a karaoke bar. So that put me firmly in their good books because I sang all the Beatles songs. I don't like the Beatles. Shouldn't say that. But anyway, I sang them. So that brought me to another kind of realization. And the greatest listening is watching. And so in terms of the mediator's language portfolio, it's not about codifying how people speak and what these expressions mean. It's actually about understanding somebody's baseline. What is their natural talking style? And that includes cadence, volume, speed, and also the sort of expressions that go with that. And if you're watching in kind of way that I watch people, hopefully they don't feel scrutinized. But anyway, you build up, because human beings are hardwired to recognize patterns, hardwired. And so you recognize these patterns. And then when the pattern deviates, you know that there's something stressful, there's something that it's causing. Now, it might be obvious that it's excitement, but if it's withholding information or not telling it quite how it is, or any sort of version of that, you pick up very, very small micro expressions and not so small expressions. I think that I would like to say something about NLP on that, because I would expect people to make some kind of correlation between what I've just said and, the study of NLP, and it's not the same. With apologies to Bandler and his colleague, whose name I forget, I remember Bandler because I met him here in Brighton, which is where I'm based. I don't like NLP because it codifies something which varies a great deal, and it depends. I did meet Bandler, and I found him to be an extraordinary man. I could understand why he fell out with his partner, mind you. Often that's the case, isn't it? But what he'd done was, he is, I think he's still alive, he is absolutely brilliant at what he does. Oh my goodness me, what an absolute star, and deeply knowledgeable, and a lot of study, all that. I cannot take it away from him. The desire to make it more accessible and therefore to codify it without that background knowledge of it depends has actually made it more of a tool, you know, something you get out of your tool bag. And that's not on my radar, those kind of tools. So it's different from that. It's developing your own ability to read the language and also to listen to somebody's song. So I think we all have a song, and I do talk about language as it is a song, because it's like you recognize somebody's language. Even if it's written down, you will know those close to you, if they're writing something, you'll know that it's them because of the language that they use and the way in which they craft their letter or birthday card or whatever. You know, it could be typed and you would still know who it was from. And so I think that's something we should all cherish, and we shouldn't try to be somebody else. So having somebody say, well, you know, if a party says this, then try this. It won't work, because if it isn't part of you and it doesn't come from your own sense of what is appropriate to say in this moment, then it will start, as I said at the beginning, it'll start to sound a bit condescending or patronizing or uncomfortable. And that's not what you want, really.
Wonderful thoughts on mediation, because I keep talking about similar things about mediation. But interestingly, what you spoke about Africa and about your father, I don't know, I spoke to you about the evolution of a mediator, that series. And this is what the idea was, that there is so much that you bring in because of your upbringing, your value systems and all that. And then the 40-hour factories on the other side. So I think you brought in that because what you picked up from him is an important aspect of who you are. So all those things, little things that add up and be you, I think that's really important. I think, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful. You know, I have two extraordinary parents. There was nothing aloof or nothing about them. They just kind of steamed through life, trying to do the best that they could. And I think that they put huge emphasis on travel. So whenever my father went on a business trip, I'd be with him. You know, Ghana, Pakistan, Iraq, when you could go there. It just, and I remember one Christmas Eve, I think it was Christmas Eve, or the day before Christmas Eve, my mother had done all the preparation for the holidays. And he came and said, we're going skiing, we're going to Andaman. That was it. Everything went in the freezer, suitcases were packed, and off we went. And I think that is a huge part of being able to talk with people, land in places, strangers, and talk with people. And the other thing that was sort of really important about that, because we were moving around quite a lot, because my dad was doing really well and my mum was, you know, we moved a lot. Between the ages of 4 and 12, I went to 13 different schools.
Wow.
Right. Now, if I wanted to blame anything for all the bad that's happened in my life, I'd say, well, you know, 13 schools, what do you expect? But no. What did it teach me? It taught me to make friends quickly, build rapport, show empathy, all those things. They were kind of hardwired from, you know, 4 years old. And so, and it never seemed strange to me. I do have a tiny bit of difficulty saying goodbye to people these days. Still, I don't like saying goodbyes. I will bawl my eyes out to say goodbye to anybody. But other than that, it's good. So
Yeah.
Sorry.
What I'm going to do, give me just a minute, because I'll tell you, I've been told that I do start my events very abruptly. Let me just talk about what we're doing, what event it is, although it's out there on the posts, but this is what we're doing, language and mediation. And of course, we've had some sessions earlier, and this has become from 20 speakers, become 25 plus speakers, 25 plus countries. So we've got that. Of course, Ken Cloke gives the closing address on the 21st. And Elyse's session was yesterday, and she's put a comment for you. Amanda, you're such an eloquent speaker. So, and I mean, you're a very genuine person. I mean, sometimes you meet some people and you see that genuineness about the person, the fact that, I mean, just being themselves, the authentic self. If you watch a session, you'll see that you of course notice these things about people. So you'll see that aspect of her. I really like that part. So that's about what, I mean, 1 second more just to put out that information. Although I keep saying it, no one really looks at it. I have to put out posts, which I don't, but just to put it out there, mediatorvikram.com exists, so you can find some things there. This book I'd contributed to, and I keep saying I don't read books. And this is where what you were saying about your own language, because we had actually done a video recording, and it was, the transcription was sent to me, and it did not sound like me, so I had to sit and do it. And of course, if there wasn't enough time, I just put everything together as to what things that I do and what I was doing during COVID. So that's what that book chapter came out to be. Of course, all social media and First World Mediation Circle, that's the focus area now. And support, edutainment, various previous last year, before that. This was interesting, that Woodstock of mediation, that symposium. And of course, Ken has been very nice to be on so many shows. All that is listed here. YouTube links are there. And of course, the YouTube channel, the Evolution of a Mediator series, and In Conversation with the Beautiful Mind, and lots of other series I started, lots of them. So all that is happening there. And I'll stop this here now. Amanda, it's about you. And please.
No, I don't mind at all. You know, I think it's important that people, you know, do understand that this is part of a hugely comprehensive collation. You are de facto are kind of biographers, Vikram. So whatever happens, there's a legacy and a footprint somewhere. The importance of language in mediation is well, I think it can make or break a good session, actually. And that's not about being using lots of big words or you know, demonstrating your command of a language. But there's something important about the language that you use. And this is where I'm coming from. We learned that there are a number of pillars on which the practice of good mediation stands. And confidentiality is one, which I think is one of its most important, without prejudice. Authority. I think authority is an important one in relation to language, because very often people come to a mediation and they feel, and they may be, but they do feel the victim, and they want somebody to sort it out for them. So the whole mindset is that however much you tell them that you're not going to give them a decision or whatever, their expectation is that your son, I think, is a deep memory of elders, and the way in which the sort of elders actually help to solve problems. And a lot of indigenous communities, they still have elders. We've got the cult of youth in the West. So, but hopefully there are still some people who recognize the hard-won expertise of that comes with age. So back to the idea of presenting yourself and actually walking your talk in terms of the things that you tell parties you're going to be. So the authority part is actually autonomy, is about them taking responsibility. Now, sometimes it takes quite a bit to move people from expecting something, even though you've told them they're not going to get it, and getting them into a position in their minds where they feel that they are truly here and free, and it is voluntary, to make a deal or not, right? That takes a while, and that's where good language comes in, because if you keep telling them, well, it's voluntary, and they pipe up and say, well, I've been told to come here. Even if the judge just wagged the finger and said, I think you ought to go and try mediation, they still feel that they have to be there. So it doesn't feel voluntary. And so the language that you use in order to underpin those elements of mediation is hugely valuable. So you're not just saying it's voluntary, your vocabulary and the way you present the ideas or what we're going to do next or whatever has to be in the spirit of voluntary. And that's down to language and the way in which you present it. So one of the most important elements of mediation in terms of language is the fact that we say we're not judgmental. Well, that's a really tough one for most people, because it takes years, I think, or at least a long time, to find that nuanced balance, very nuanced balance between discernment and judging, right? And of course, as a mediator, you're judging all the time, because you're judging what to do next, what might work, and you're making and you're looking at people and you are making a judgment. So when you say non-judgmental, actually what it really means is that you're not using vocabulary that it is projecting certain kinds of thinking or attitudes or mindsets onto people. It can be very triggering. And at the same time, they don't want you to be sort of all cuddly and floppy and all over the place with a sort of lovey-dovey language, which doesn't go down very well at all, I'm afraid. So working on that kind of vocabulary, which is natural and integral to the way you speak and how you address people, is hugely important. And it really does take practice. It really does take practice. So that's a very important aspect. And non-violent communication is a great way to explore that. But even so, you still have to come to your own way of expressing observations without them being judgmental, because they can be very triggering for people, especially these days. I remember years ago I had a case, and the whole case was about, it was a breach of contract case. It's been presented as that, but there was a sort of secondary claim of racial discrimination. And actually, when I looked at it, I thought, this is not about breach of contract, this is about racial discrimination. It was a long time ago, a long time ago. And the whole case hung on the fact that the airline check-in person who had refused boarding to a young girl who was Asian, and the young girl had said, you can't do that, I've got a ticket. And the agent turned around and said, we can do what we like with people like you. People like you. Now, within another context, it was a blowout and the ticket was illegitimate, and you know, it was contractually, it was quite clear cut, actually. But within that context, people like you, you know, it's going to be taken the wrong way or the right way or whatever way you want. And there's a lot of that language around these days. So it's not just about your own language as a mediator, but it's also about setting the tone and an example for the parties so that they don't, you know, depart into language which is very triggering. And yeah, we have the ground rules at the beginning. Sometimes those are quite difficult to say. I call them ground rules for grown-ups if I have to. But sometimes you do actually have to tell people, no, you won't shout and scream and use, you know, foul language, not in my room, sort of thing, you know. You can go and do that when you go for a walk in the park. But I think one of the most difficult things that we all have to do is to pay constant attention to the vocabulary and the way we speak and how we express ourselves, and develop that within the congruence of our own personality. And as a mediator, you are definitely can have a personality. In fact, it's a big advantage, but you can't have an ego. That has to stay at the door. When you go in the room, it's at the door. And there's it just takes time to find that, so that you are talking to people and talking about it's voluntary when they're threatening to walk out, or they're accusing the other side of something or another. And it's that rhythm. And you have to work, I think, as a mediator, you have to work on a rhythm which is not the same. Consciously have to change your rhythm, your pace, the length of your sentences, how you punctuate things. Because with that, with your language and your conscious effort to think about the rhythm, the music, your song, you can help maintain energy levels with the others. And I'm conscious that I want to pause here and allow you to say something.
No, perfect. I think you're going exactly what I would have thought you would go to. But only thing is your own evolution in relation to language in mediation. You'll take us through that also.
Say again?
Your evolution in relation to language and mediation over the years that you've been practicing. Something on how you looked at things and how things changed, and how with the cultural changes, with the with time, how people perceived mediation, maybe whatever. I mean, I'm just thinking
Well,
what would come out with your experience. Let's use your experience and see how things have changed.
well, I think I've got a couple more of the sort of claims we made. So talking about walking your talk, I think this all comes under the heading walking your talk, and building a deeper level of rapport and trust, which is not just one which is at the beginning, and maintaining that rapport and trust, and actually getting to a point where you can actually be quite fierce if you need to be, and you don't break trust and rapport. And that's what I mean by it takes a lot of practice and regular attention to what you are saying and how you do that, and asking people, you know, is there anything that I've said, if you notice a change, you know, is there anything I've said that you want me to talk about? Or inviting people to really sort of tell you what's working or what's not working for them in the moment. And I often say to people, you know, it's no good telling me my feedback form. I'd like to know now, so I can, you know, I can be aware of it and do something about it. So when I've talked about non-judgmental, well, the other one which is really important is this word neutral. I have to tell you, I don't like it. I think it's a hopeless word for what we do, right? In my world, in my linguistic world, this is what neutral means. Neutral means a car that is out of gear and going nowhere, right? I don't want to be a car that's going nowhere. Neutral in the world of colour means it just sort of blends into the background and you don't even notice it's there. It's nothing. No, thank you very much. I don't want to be neutral. And deep down, people know this neutral word, and they know it, and we use it. Or I don't, I promise you, I just don't use it. But I hear other people, you know, neutral and independent. Well, independent's fine. That's a good word for what we do, independent of everything. But you can't use a word like that and then have the energy to guide people, you know, because it's not a passive thing that we do. We're actually guiding people. And to do that, you have to use language which is kind of moving forward, progress. Neutral doesn't work, right, for reasons I've just said. So much better is something like even-handed. And I think people like that term even-handed, because just like the scales of justice, of which I've got a tiny little version over there, which is actually always out of kilter, which pleases me, because if anything's ever in balance, it's dead, right? So it's always got to be like this. So, excuse me. So even-handed, and I've heard mediators make promises about spending equal time with people. Well, it's a hostage to disaster, actually, because how can you say that you're going to spend equal time and you're going to be equal with everybody and you're going to treat them all equally? God forbid, right? Because the joy of mediation is that the parties come, they are themselves, even if they're sort of slightly, you know, unmanageable, or even very unmanageable sometimes. But they bring themselves, and you might need to spend, in the interests of everybody, you might need to spend a considerable amount of time, more with one party than with the other. So you know, the even-handedness is very much like, often find ways of reinforcing that idea of even-handedness later on. So consciously peppering the conversation with supporting words that underpin the qualities of the mediation. And, you know, this takes effort. And it takes practice, actually. And over the years, I have found that it's become more and more important as the emphasis on equality, diversity, inclusion, etc., has raised, in volume, and people are more sensitive about even-handedness, and it really is very dangerous to talk about treating people equally, or even though that's kind of what you want to do. But everybody's equal? No, they're not. They're different. They have their own ways of communicating, and particularly as I do mediate with a lot of people who are neurodiverse. They may be, somewhere on the autism spectrum, or they may be dyslexic, or they may be being diagnosed with ADHD. Well, for example, I think it's something like 25%, and I can't tell you where the figures come from. Sure, it did come from a decent source, otherwise I wouldn't have remembered it. 25% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic. So the dyslexia, or the wiring that demonstrates itself as dyslexia, is perfectly aligned with entrepreneurial spirit and the ability to sort of, do something. Well, if I am mediating, it's very helpful to know somebody dyslexic. Unfortunately, as things have moved on, people are more willing to say that. Once upon a time, it was, a dark secret that you were dyslexic, which is quite sad, really, but that's the way it was. You don't want to be piling on a whole load of paperwork. That's not going to help anybody. And actually, files and files and files and files and files of, 45 copies of the pleadings plus attendant documentation doesn't really belong at mediation, in my humble opinion. And that's deliberately sarcastic, but it doesn't. And on that point, over the years, I remember way back when I sort of was first mediating, first 5 years, you needed a lorry to deliver the paperwork that came along with the meeting. Really, you did. And I do remember going to some very smart city law offices with a gentleman who had quite a serious nervous breakdown, was very poorly, was taking drugs, and everybody said, you can't mediate a case like that. Yes, you can, because he was well supported by extremely good counsel and very good solicitor, and his wife was there. So there were plenty of people around him, and joy for the voluntary nature of striking a deal. However, 19 box files of paperwork. And the claimant, who'd been an exceptional employee at very high level because of some event, was now on psychiatric medication. And I'll finish the story of this one because I think this also speaks to language and the way in which it is delivered. The solicitors who were representing the defendants, it was held in their offices, and they had picked for their small team the most palatial room with all the whistles and the accoutrements. And the claimant's room was, honest to goodness, a broom cupboard, right? Well, this mediator was not having this. So she said, in the interest of this being a successful meeting, and it would be really important for this gentleman who was, you know, really quite poorly, to have a bit more space, I made them swap. That was not popular, right? So the hosting law firm went into the broom cupboard, and it was absolutely brilliant, but it really did galvanize we want to get out of here because we don't like the broom cupboard. So it was quite sneaky of me, actually. So, and there was a realization that this had been a really bad, they'd behaved badly, effectively, the employer had behaved badly. And the client really wanted to apologize. And that was because they had sat together in the opening session, having said, oh, we don't think it's a good idea, Amanda. We don't want to sit around the table together. We don't. And I said, well, look, you know, can we just have 5 minutes? Because I would like you both to hear what I have to say. So you're hearing the same thing at the same time. I said, okay. Anyway, the opening session, as is often the case, went on quite a bit longer than that. And they could see for themselves the effect that this whole thing had had on this man. And they knew him from before, so they could see the difference between how he was before and how he was now. And that galvanized them into action. And part of it was, and this is where I say, you know, good counsel and good solicitor. Boy, these two girls were fantastic. I came back and I said, well, you know, they want an apology. And I'm still sticking with the theme of language, Vikram. I know I might be sort of slightly on the edge of it, but it is language. And they said, oh, well, that won't, you know, it's not going to work. If they think they're going to reduce the, you know, amount payable by that. And so I said, no, I said, I think he really does want to, you know, apologize. So, well, you get him to write it down. Now, this was so, it remained in my memory and will forever. I went and invited, I said, would you mind just sort of writing what you want to say? I said, no, I'd like, because of the nature of it, I'd like to run it by counsel, and, you know, and then most importantly, I'd like you to deliver it, you know, face to face. And he agreed with that. You write this thing. I remember it was in green pen, green biro. And I looked at this thing and I'm reading it as I'm walking down the corridor to take it to the council. And it was beautiful. The language was utterly beautiful. No artifice, nothing. It was, and you know how I know it was straight from the heart? There was not one single word crossed out. It just went whoosh like that. And they hadn't had time to write it and copy it out neatly. I mean, I think there were a couple of, you know, tiny marks, but there was no, you know, lines written, crossed through and rewritten. And when I took it, I thought, this, you know, gosh, humbled I was by the capacity of this person to really grasp the effects it had had. And whether the rights or wrongs about it didn't matter, it didn't deserve to have that effect on another human being. And when the counsel and solicitor read this apology, well, I tell you, all of us were in floods of tears. It was so.
It's Mohammed's session. Mohammed is here. His session is coming after yours.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll hurry up then.
Hi, Mohammed. We can say hi to him. We can say hi to him. Hi.
Hello. So the language of the apology was very, very important, and it was not embellished. It wasn't pat. It didn't come from somewhere else. It was utterly fantastic in that regard. Very simple, very much from the heart. So that's the power of good language. And because they'd had the opportunity to meet each other at the beginning, this guy knew that he had come from, and because he knew him as well, he recognized the cadence and the rhythm and the vocabulary. And when that was read to him by the person who'd written it, this man went from grey and shriveled to, I wouldn't say it was sort of like, back to normal, because that would have been very odd, but the strain that just slipped from this guy's face and body was absolute magic. So the crafting of something to deliver something deep and meaningful translates equally into the work that we do. And I think care and practice and attention to making that congruent with all the principles of mediation, even-handedness, even empathy. I mean, empathy is bandied around like, sweeties, and still there persists the misunderstanding what the difference is between sympathy and empathy. And I'm afraid saying, I know how you feel, is probably one of the most inflammatory things you can say to somebody who's in distress or angry or any other emotion. So you don't say that, but do I hear it? Oh, yes, I hear it. And there are other things which, against the background of social media, where a lot of people feel able, not the majority, but a lot, and it gets a lot of airtime, feel able to say the most outrageous things from a keyboard without any sort of face-to-face consequences. There are a number of things which I think people should be very careful of. And this probably is quite a good place to sort of wrap up with some examples of what I think can be very, very triggering. Never say, to be honest, or worse, if I'm honest. First of all, you are signaling without doubt that you're about to say something which you probably shouldn't. And it's definitely going to land badly. And if you know that, don't say it. The special feature about if I'm honest is you are broadcasting to everybody who is listening to you that you are making a special occasion out of being honest. Right? All the other times you're not honest because you said, if I'm honest. That's just not good. And the other one, obviously. I never say obviously. If you say obviously to somebody, obviously, it's not obvious. Because if you need to say obviously, it wasn't obvious. And you are actually being extremely condescending. And you are signaling to that person that they are stupid because they didn't get you in the first place. But with these just trot out of people's minds. The other one is basically. It's slightly better than obviously, but basically is getting there is that I need to reduce this to very simplistic terms so that you can understand it. Not good. It's just not good. And the sort of shortening of sentences and the talking in sort of the brevity there, it started out, you know, this is a practice that started with Twitter and 144 characters, and it sort of continued. And, you know, sometimes in emails, because, you know, mediation isn't just about being in person. You've got to think about the times when you can't write like that in emails where people are trying to resolve conflict. You have to, in my view, you know, be clear, but not like that, because the cadence of that is about you follow my rules rather than what do you think about and how do you, what if you, and we all love what if. We have to find other ways of saying what if. And I find lots of ways of saying what if, because what if is one of those formulaic things that we are taught, or people are taught in that mediation training. And you have to find ways of saying the same thing, but not, what if you knew? Because it sounds like you've thought about this idea and actually you're driving them towards the answer that you first thought of. So it's this driving language that I think has got to be abandoned in mediation. Your momentum comes from how you're managing the process and the cadence and the rhythm of your voice in terms of energy levels. You don't need to drive people or use all that kind of corporate language. And the last thing that you should have in most mediations is a load of corporate jargon, because it takes the mindset back to the mindset that created the problem in the first place. So using your language helps people shift their mindset. And I also think the careful use of language actually relaxes people. Well, certainly if the language is coming from the mediator, it relaxes people because it's not triggering all those sort of patterns that create anxiety, lack of confidence, withholding information, all that kind of thing. And before I hand back to you, I've got a poem I'd like to read. It's by Kafia, which will be familiar. And I think poetry and the practice of writing poetry is a hugely advantageous exercise for mediators, because it helps them really get to the essence of what something means. This speaks to being very committed to help people find a resolution and working really hard to get there. And if they choose not to say yes on that day, not minding at all, right? And living in that paradox is the place to be, minding very, very much and doing your very best and not minding at all. And then you can do a good job. So here's my poem that speaks to that. Where the shopkeeper would say, I was looking for that shop where the shopkeeper would say, there is nothing of value in here. I found it and did not leave. The richness of not wanting wrote these poems. So my last phrase in this sort of session is the richness of not wanting.
We have 1 minute. Quickly, what I'm going to do is what comments we have. If 1 minute we can take that up, we can. Otherwise, of course, we'll have to. Can you see the screen? So basically,
Yes.
this is what we've got. Amanda is an eloquent speaker, so incredibly comfortable in touching this part of your language and mediation mindset, dear Amanda. Do you think the mediator should be in language place in talking or reframing and translating the participant's soul language? Can we mediate when we don't understand the language of one part of conflict using translation? I believe yes, as long as I live with it. That's the answer there. But of course, waiting for you to tell us. Let's see one thing. Very interesting part about not using the word neutral, equality. So those are the comments. Broom cupboard switch.
Well, that's fantastic. And in answer to the interpreter thing, I think it offers a fantastic advantage. What you do need is to know that the interpreter understands your cadence and language, not because you want them to repeat it, but so that they don't misinterpret it. But there's a beauty about having a mediation where there is interpreters, and everybody gets that extra bit of time to think, and slowing people down so that they can actually spend time on thinking about what matters is crucial. And to my very favorite saying of all is festina lente, hurry up slowly.
Perfect. So thank you, Amanda. Really nice, very interesting, and of course, very insightful. And I'll